everyone. Mr. Eford here, coming at you with part 2 of our lesson on ancient Israel. Now, yesterday we began part 1 of our lesson, and we learned about the Israelites from the beginning of their civilization with Abraham and the covenant that he made with God, all the way up through the Exodus, which is where Moses leads the people out of Egypt, out of captivity and slavery, and into what is called the Promised Land. So our story continues on today. For my students at home, please make sure that you are filling in the notes. Now, you'll need to open your note sheet from yesterday's assignment and then continue to add notes to it as we go through the remainder of this lesson. So let's pick up where we left off. And we're actually going to be just right after Moses leads the people out of Israel across the Red Sea, that we're going to find out about this next big thing, which is the Ten Commandments. All right. So on the way back from Egypt into Canaan, the Israelites had to cross an area called the Sinai Desert. All right. The Hebrew Bible says that during this journey, Moses goes up to the top of Mount Sinai and he has a conversation with God. Okay. God gives him the laws and he gives him what's called the Torah. This later became the first part of the Hebrew Bible. Again, the first 5 chapters of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, are the Torah. Okay. So Moses receives this at the top of the mountain. He also receives a covenant from God. And a covenant simply means a legally binding agreement. It means that both parties in this agreement are bound to whatever it is that they have promised. Okay. So here's the covenant that God gives to Moses. He gives Moses the law and he tells Moses, I will lead the people into the promised land, this land that's going to be beautiful and wonderful for them to live in. But in return, the people must follow my laws. Okay. So if the people follow the law, they get to go into the promised land. That's the covenant. All right, the Torah explains what God considers to be right and wrong. Again, this idea of moral law, what is good, what is bad, what's right, what's wrong, what's good and evil. All of this can be described under morality, and that's kind of where this law comes into play. One important part of the Torah is called the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments tell the Israelites to be loyal only to God. Okay, he's the only God. You can't worship other gods. So to be loyal to God, whose name was never to be misused. They must never worship any other gods or images. The belief that there should be only one God is the foundation of both Christianity and Islam as well. We said that Judaism played an important role in the development of these two other world religions. And this is kind of where that comes into play. The monotheistic, there's only one God. You can only worship this God. You're not to worship any other gods. All right, the Ten Commandments also help shape the basic moral law of many nations. These commandments told people not to steal, not to murder, don't tell lies about other people. They told people to avoid jealousy and to honor their parents. The Ten Commandments also help develop a belief that laws should apply to everyone equally. No one is exempt from the law. Okay, the law applied to the kings just as well as they applied to the commoners. And again, it's because the law did not, at least according to the Hebrew Bible, the law did not come from man, right? Humans didn't come up with the law. They didn't invent this law. The law came from God. And because it came from God, everyone had to follow it equally. Okay. All right, the Promised Land. Let's talk about Canaan for just a minute here. The Israelites did have to fight the Canaanites in order to return to the Promised Land. It probably took the Israelites around 40 years to reach Canaan. Moses never lived to see the Promised Land. After he died, there was a new leader named Joshua who took command and brought the Israelites into Canaan. Moses died right before the Israelites entered into the Promised Land. There's a whole story that goes along with that about the Israelites grumbling and breaking the law and that Moses couldn't take them in. So Joshua leads the people into the Promised Land. He's a new leader, both as a leader of the people, but also as a military leader. Joshua's in command of the Israelite people at this point in time. Okay. When they arrived, however, they found that the people were living there. It wasn't just an empty land. Okay. Most were Canaanites. The Israelites believed that it was God's will that they conquer the Canaanites, so Joshua led them into battle. The story of the war is told in the Hebrew Bible. Joshua led the Israelites into a city called Jericho and told them to march around the city's walls. For 6 days they marched while 7 priests blew their trumpets. Then on the seventh day, the trumpet sounded one last time, and Joshua told all of the Israelites to raise a great shout. In other words, yell as loud as you can yell. And according to the story, the walls of Jericho crumbled. The Israelites overran the city, and Joshua led the Israelites into 3 more wars. The land that they seized was divided among the 12 tribes, and this becomes the land of Israel. All right, so we move into a period called the period of Judges, and this is a really interesting time period in Israel. After Joshua died, the Israelites looked to a group of people called judges for leadership. The judge was usually a military leader. Generally, he or she, notice the feminine pronoun there, he or she commanded either 1 or 2 of the tribes, but never all 12, right? There wasn't a leader for all 12 tribes. They didn't have a king yet. So this judge would be a leader of 1 or maybe 2 tribes of Israel. Okay? The Hebrew Bible tells about judges like Barak, Gideon, Samuel, Eli. One that most people are familiar with is Samson. He was a really strong guy. And others, including a woman judge whose name was Deborah. And her story is really, really interesting. Okay, Deborah told Barak, who's another judge, to attack the army of the Canaanites, and especially their king, a guy by the name of Jabin. She went along to the battlefield as an advisor. With Deborah's help, Barak and 10,000 Israelites destroyed King Jabin and his army in around 1125 BC. Over time, the Israelites won control of the hilly region in central Canaan. The Canaanites kept the flat coastal areas. So to protect themselves, the Israelites built walled towns. Okay, we've seen this with other civilizations as well. You build a wall to protect your city and protect from outside invasions. Okay, they also created their own alphabet, which we saw a little bit earlier with the Hebrew writing. They developed a calendar based on Canaanite ideas so they could keep track of time. All right, Phoenician alphabet. One group of Canaanites called the Phoenicians, and we've already talked about these guys. They're the ones who made the color purple by squeezing the snails. They lived in cities along the Mediterranean Sea. The Phoenicians were skilled sailors and traders. Their ships carried goods across the Mediterranean to Greece and Spain and even Western Africa. Through trade, the Phoenicians spread their own ideas and goods. And one of the most important ideas that they spread with the world was their alphabet, which is a group of letters that stand for sounds. The letters could be used to spell out words in any language, really. And this is where we get the basis for our own alphabet. Instead of having a symbol that represents every item and every noun, we can combine 26 letters together into pretty much any word that exists. So the Phoenicians came up with this idea. They spread it to all sorts of other cultures and civilizations in the world at this time. The alphabet made writing much simpler and helped people to keep records. The Phoenicians brought the idea of the alphabet to the Greeks, who passed it on to the Romans. Most Western alphabets, including our own, is based on the Roman alphabet. So the Phoenicians are responsible for giving us our version of the written language, the way that we do it using the alphabet. All right, and you can see here the Phoenician alphabet as compared to the Hebrew and Greek and Roman. There are similarities and differences between each of these letters, okay? But know that the idea of the alphabet is shared between each one of these cultures, and it all kind of stems from Phoenicia. All right, so in summary, to wrap things up here, the Israelites, led by Abraham, settled in a land called Canaan. They later moved to Egypt, where they were enslaved by the Pharaoh. But then they escaped, of course, under the leadership of Moses. After the plagues, Moses leads them out of Egypt. The Israelites use the 10 Commandments as rules to live by. So they have a moral law that they are required to follow. All right, Joshua and the judges, including Deborah. So it's not just male leaders. We have female leaders here as well. Won back territory in central Canaan for the Israelites to live in. And that's all for now, folks. And we're going to talk about the kings of Israel a little bit later on. When the period of Judges ends, we're going to see the first king, a guy by the name of Saul, take over Israel. And then we're going to see leaders like David and Solomon and some very important events take place in the history of Israel after this point in time. But for right now, that's all we have. I hope that you guys have learned something from this. Until we see each other again, take care. Have a good day.